We've now reached the moment in this ceremony when we honor an extraordinary individual whose life's work has advanced the cause of education while upholding TC's core mission to foster excellence and equity in the fields we serve. This year, we honor 4 preeminent scholars and practitioners: Tom Frieden, Christy Gutierrez, Susan Fisk, and Sandra Jackson Dumont. I'm very pleased to welcome TC Professor Lalitha Vasudevan, joined by Provost Thomas James, to introduce Christy Gutierrez. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and congratulations, graduates. It is my pleasure to invite our medalist, Professor Christy Gutierrez, to join us at the podium. Christy Gutierrez. Lawrence Kremen, Teachers College's great education historian, argued that context often is the most essential variable in learning. In 21st century America, where the student population reflects increased diversity in cultural backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives, you have led the field in exploring the importance of context and leveraging its impact in education. Your scholarship combines rich and elegant ethnographic studies of entire school districts with your firsthand experiencing partnering with local communities. As designer and director of an after-school learning club for low-income and immigrant children, as director of the UCLA Migrant Scholars Leadership Program, and as founder and facilitator of other research and pedagogically rich projects rooted in understandings of communities' cultural heritage. You have transformed the education world's approach to the nation's rapidly growing population of English language learners and those from other non-dominant communities. Your vision of teaching toward possibility not only challenges educators to move beyond narrow conceptions of disciplinary knowledge, it also makes a powerful case for enabling young people to occupy an educational third space, offering multiple opportunities to think creatively and to develop new meanings. This 21st century blueprint for democratic education addresses the importance of culture in mediating learning, while recognizing the nuanced and varied impacts of cultural experiences. You have shown that all students thrive in rigorous learning environments that are rich in resources, that promote a wide range of literacy practices, and that engage linguistic and cultural diversities as strengths. UCLA, the University of Colorado at Boulder, and UC Berkeley have recognized your innovative scholarship by bestowing titles such as Inaugural Provost Chair and Professor Emerita. You have also earned the acclaim of leading professional societies, including the American Educational Research Association, where you served as president.
Christy Gutierrez, for championing the needs of all students, for affirming that scholars can and must have a lasting impact beyond the academy, and for providing all of us with a context for teaching toward possibility. We are proud to present you with the Teachers College Medal for Distinguished Service.
Thank you for this wonderful honor. In honor of the late Prince, I was tempted to start out by saying, "Dearly beloved." But instead, I'll simply say to the Teachers College Board of Trustees, President Susan Fuhrman, Mr. Jack Hyland, co-chair of the board, the Alumni Council, Provost Tom James, distinguished faculty, cherished families, and honored graduates, I am honored to be your commencement speaker at one of the finest universities in the world. Graduates, you've already distinguished yourself as you now become one of the 7.2% of people in the country who hold master's degrees. There are few moments in your life that will bring such pride and joy to your families, friends, and loved ones. Today, some of you continue the proud legacy in your family of obtaining advanced degrees. Others of you are part of a new generation of young scholars who are creating new trajectories for your families and communities. I'm part of the latter group. I am the daughter of a copper miner who was also a decorated World War II veteran and of a teacher's aide. Parents who provided the context of development for me to excel and flourish. We lived for generations in a small company-owned mining town with a previous history of racial segregation that placed Native Americans and Mexican Americans, as they were termed then, into separate schools until the 1950s. African Americans were even further segregated. It was a town and region ravished by extreme environmental toxicity, both from the mines and from the nuclear fallout, from above-ground testing until the 1960s in Nevada. As you science graduates may know, radiation fallout travels downwind, creating cancer corridors in its path. We lived in this cancer corridor. My mother and I are downwinders, that is, people meeting the government criteria to classify our cancers as related to the downwind radiation. My mother recently passed away from her second radiation exposure-related cancer. Despite these constraints, this was a resilient ecology that for decades produced a remarkable number of second, third, and fourth generation Chicana doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, lots of teachers, a US congressman, a US Secretary of Treasury, a MacArthur Genius Award winner, and professors, including yours truly. Arguably, this experience had a profound influence on my life and my scholarship, and what gives value and meaning to my work. Across my professional and personal life, I have worked to develop a new social imagination about the world as it could be. Key to that imagination has been recognizing the humanity and ingenuity in, as well as the hope and possibility of everyday people. C. Wright Mills argued the importance of developing a sociological imagination. Graduates, it is this need for a new imagination, one that involves rethinking the importance of developing relationships and learning from everyday people, that I wish to talk about today. There's an old song, Everyday People, by Sly and the Family Stone, that reminds us that we are all everyday people. Sometimes I'm right, and I can be wrong. My own beliefs are in my song. The butcher, the baker, the drummer, and then makes no difference what group I'm in. I am everyday people. Yeah, yeah. Oh, sha, sha. We gotta live together. If I could sing, I would have. As corny as the words are from this old song, they still resonate with profound issues that you must confront, regardless of whether your focus is in health, education, policy, psychology, or STEM-related fields, whether in national or international contexts. Youth across learning environments are experiencing heightened forms of disconnected learning, trauma, discrimination, and health-related issues. Schools are more segregated today than they were several decades ago. Monolingualism is the prevailing language ideology in a country that is increasingly polylingual. While there is super diversity in cities and regions of the country, these areas are also marked by super poverty. National and local discourses around race, gender identity, sexuality, national origin, immigration status, language, and difference in general are increasingly amplified by intolerance, hate, and bigotry. Some potential and elected policymakers talk about and make policy without regard to fact, science, or understanding of the very communities who would be most affected by public, social, and educational policy. Do they know what it is like to study and work and just engage in daily life if you are a student attacked by a school security guard, as in Baltimore, or negotiate the everyday violence in Chicago, or experience the increased ICE raids for Latino and other immigrant families? Graduates, this is your challenge. Rather than succumbing to despair or cynicism, or inadvertently perpetuating reductive and problematic narratives about the people and communities with whom you will work, I ask you to see resilience instead of deficit, to imagine new futures instead of failure, to see hope and possibility in your everyday practices as well as in those with whom you will work. In short, I urge you to develop a new social imagination about what it means to engage in consequential work that has transformative potential, intellectually, educationally, and socially. You represent the finest young scholars from a range of programs, from human development, international transcultural studies, math, science, and technology, to organizational management and leadership. And you will enter careers and become leaders. You will take your knowledge, skills, and expertise to the educational, nonprofit, and corporate worlds. And while you have developed the requisite skills, indeed skills central to your professions, these toolkits are insufficient to engage in transformative change if you view your individual success as being at odds with working toward the public good. But this move requires learning to see differently, to seek complex understandings to complex problems, and knowing that doing your work brilliantly and with integrity involves seeing people and communities in their full humanity. This focus on learning from everyday people has been instrumental to my work as a learning scientist, interested in how people learn, as a qualitative methodologist, interested in the importance of learning about youth and families' everyday routines, to understand how people live culturally, and to understand the ingenuity involved in the new media practices of working families. As an education researcher interested in advancing a view of learning as the organization of possible futures, I've spent my life designing robust learning environments where all youth could be smart. And this meant being in and part of the everyday lives in order to design, to advise around educational policy, and to lead. I would like to turn very briefly to one such event that served as a profound reminder that some of the richest moments of learning take place in everyday interactions. In 2011, I was president of the American Educational Research Association, one of the largest professional organizations in the US and the world. Its conferences generally include 13,000 to 15,000 people. My conference held in New Orleans was by all accounts hugely successful, and at the end of that long week, I was both proud and exhausted. Now, there are a few perks that come with being an ERA president, but one involves getting picked up and driven back to the airport. Except that the New Orleans Marriott didn't have a driver. Instead, Keith, the bellman, doubled as their driver. And so here is where my learning began. As I was reflecting in the car on the week's events during my ride to the airport, I spotted an old cemetery with large tombstones and vaults, and I wondered aloud who might be there. This sparked the beginning of a remarkable conversation with Keith, the driver, whose historical knowledge of the city was carried in a detailed and intricate narrative about his family's history, a story interspersed with proclamations about the importance of education and the need for people to know their histories, and how a good education could provide that opportunity. Here, sitting in the front seat of the car, was an historical actor, known to most as the bellman of the New Orleans Marriott, where he had worked for nearly 30 years. When I began asking him about his family, he remarked that the Plessy family had been residents in New Orleans for generations. Some were well-to-do and some poor folk like him, he said. One side of the family, he shared, had been politically active, especially his great cousin Homer A. Plessy, a shoemaker in Tremé. In 1892, Mr. Plessy had been arrested for sitting in a railroad car in a section reserved for white people, instead of sitting in the designated car for black people. Keith had my attention. Keith asked if I had ever heard of Homer Plessy. He was pleased that I had and impressed with my knowledge of Plessy versus Ferguson. As a reminder to those of you in the audience, in 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of segregation under the separate but equal doctrine in the case Plessy versus Ferguson. in which restrictive legislation based on race continued until 1954, when Brown v. Board. The case Plessy versus Ferguson, of course, remains a landmark case with far-reaching implications for generations of African Americans and other members of non-dominant communities. Keith Plessy had learned about his relationship to this historic case from his teachers in New Orleans. He'd also learned from family stories and teachers about Treme, one of the oldest Black neighborhoods in the country that had been populated by free and freed African Americans. He was proud of his family's history and leveraged it towards important ends. Fast forward to the present. Keith Plessy and Phoebe Ferguson, a documentary filmmaker and great-granddaughter of Judge John Howard Ferguson, who had ruled against Plessy, had joined forces and founded the Plessy and Ferguson Foundation for Education, Preservation, and Outreach to develop an understanding of this historic case and its effects on the American conscience. Keith spends much of his time outside his work as a bellman, speaking to audiences about the case and its importance. I was captivated for so many reasons by Keith Plessy's life story and his commitment to education as a civil right. But as of relevance to my talk today, I was both humbled and in awe of the life of this so-called everyday man who, in the span of a ride to the airport, taught me about history, about the way we read and misread folks, and how much there is to learn from a focus on the everyday routines and histories of people with whom we interact. Mr. Keith Plessy, like his well-known cousin Homer, were everyday men who became historical actors by doing something ordinary and making it into something extraordinary. As historical actors, they learned about their unjust past, used this understanding as a resource for the present for future action. Graduates, you have the opportunity to do something ordinary in your work and to turn that work into something extraordinary. The question for you, dear graduates, is what kind of historical actors do you want to become? Thank you.